What's up, family? It's your man, Mark Black. This commentary will address the most controversial topic I will ever speak about. This topic is more controversial than black gender relations, and discussing black gender relations is a virtual minefield, even with the best of intentions. I want to say right out of the gate that I'm going to offend some, if not many of you, with my statements in this video. Some of you will feel insulted and upset with what I have to say, regardless of any statement I make saying that it is not my desire to insult you. So let me just save everyone some time and trouble and say from the beginning that I cannot care over much about your feelings. I'm going to try to stick to just facts, and where I must interpret those facts, I will not hide my hand and toss stones. You'll know right where I stand before I start. Today, I'm going to talk about violence, aggression, and defense. This commentary is a response to the 4 black folk in Chicago who have been charged with hate crimes and kidnapping. Although I do not argue in defense of them specifically, some of my statements may be taken as defending them, and since I cannot stop people from thinking, such is life. I also will be doing a live Q&A discussion later on to discuss this topic in more detail. Before I continue, I promised that you would know my biases before I got into this in detail, so here they are. I advocate for self and the collective defense of all black people everywhere and using any methods available. I also advocate for attacking known enemies whenever possible with the minimum loss of our black lives. I don't advocate for any behaviors that go beyond what is needed to effectively neutralize a threat. I do advocate that once fighting starts, that we fight until all threats are neutralized. I do not believe that violence, aggression, and defense is solely the domain of pale people, nor do I believe that to engage in these acts makes us as bad as the pale people. Most importantly, for the sake of this discussion, I disavow the idea that violence, aggression, or defense is inherently brutal, inhumane, unspiritual, or immoral in any way. Just as I do in every video, I refuse to allow anyone to control my narrative, so I will define exactly what I mean by violence, aggression, and defense. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to make sure we are all on the same page. The World Health Organization, the WHO, defines violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation, unquote. This works for me and will be the definition I use. I will define aggression as any oppositional behavior that has the purpose of causing harm to someone or something. Easy enough definition, right? Lastly, I will use the definition of defense as any behaviors, systems, or tactics that are utilized to prevent being harmed by aggression from an opposing force. Now that you all know exactly what I mean and what my stances are, you can either disagree and go click on a cat video, or stick around a bit and possibly learn something. I am going to share with you a timeline of factual events. I will then interpret those events and address the topic in detail. Hang on, family, because the ride, while long, will be instructive. Kidnapped Africans had been taken from the motherland for hundreds of years before pale people from West Asia even showed their faces there. They were transported all over the so-called Muslim world via the ports of the Waswahili people. I only mention this because black Muslims like to throw in our Christian families' faces that they follow a religion that allowed for their ancestors' enslavement, when the overwhelming majority of Muslims themselves had, and to some extent today still have, no issues with slavery, based mostly on the rulings of Islamic scholars and the acceptance of narrations that appear to have allowed for the continued enslavement of human beings. The Quran makes very few hard prescriptions surrounding slavery and mostly instructs believers to free slaves, and for those who at the time of its revelation still claimed ownership of humans, to require treating them with justice. The Portuguese were the first West Asians to kidnap Africans as slaves as part of their partnership with Spain. Many of them were taken to West Asia, and some few were sent to Hispaniola, the current nations of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The first record I was able to find of direct transportation of kidnapped Africans to the West instead of via West Asia was in 1530 by Juan de la Barrera. From that point until formal emancipation of slavery in the West, kidnapped Africans were imported here. Brazil was the destination of the vast majority of our kidnapped ancestors, and at the time of emancipation here in the United States, there were around 4.5 million people released from chattel slavery. I could go on, but this timeline isn't going to be exhaustive, at least not any more than it is already. After the legal emancipation of our enslaved ancestors, various states, using the legal system, instituted various forms of what would constitute re-enslavement where possible, and in the early part of the 20th century would use the methods known as Jim Crow laws to effectively maintain whitest domination over our people. One thing to mention is that throughout our entire history here in the wilds of the West, we were attacked, beaten, raped, mutilated, and murdered by pale people. This continues up to the current day and should be beyond any dispute. Now that I've laid out the timeline of facts, let us discuss violence, aggression, and defense from a Black first perspective. During chattel slavery, there were over 250 documented rebellions, uprisings, and revolts by kidnapped Africans. One of the greatest and most successful was the overthrow of the French and the creation of the first and only African nation in the West, Haiti. One of the greatest leaders of the independence struggle in Haiti, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, was quoted as saying, "Leave nothing white behind you." In 1804, he ordered the execution of any remaining French pale people in Haiti. This resulted in the deaths of between 3,000 to 5,000 pale people. So, how do we interpret these acts? Do we call them barbarism and brutality? How about another time and place, family? During the reign of King Leopold of Belgium, he controlled the so-called Congo Free State in Africa. Because of the claim that accurate records were not kept, we'll never be sure of the numbers of people mutilated, raped, and murdered under his rule, but all estimates report numbers in the millions of people. So how do we interpret these acts? Do we call them barbarism and brutality? Those of us who argue against violence and aggression from and defense of Black people make three primary arguments. It's time to address them and deal with them. I'm fully aware that when we begin to argue the morality and ethics of violence, we find ourselves quickly on slippery ground. So I will present their arguments and mine and let us decide which arguments address the reality of the situation better. In other words, fuck your feelings. Let's just keep it real, shall we? The first argument against violence that I will address is the argument that goes something like this. If we fight the pale people, that just gives them an excuse to retaliate. Basically, these Black people argue that when we do stuff that hurt pale people or that they don't like, it sets us up for continued attacks from them. Now, saying this out loud should make everyone laugh, but I know it doesn't, and I know why. One of the first things that our pale kidnappers did when they took us from the motherland was to do every vile, painful, and traumatizing thing short of death to the majority of us and kill not a small number of us. If the whole thing is about using us to generate wealth for them, why would they do this? It's simple, really. Because once they made us aware that any move toward our liberation from them would be met with extreme violence and aggression, they could be assured that we would not try to escape. According to psychological studies of learned helplessness behavior, the only way this violence could be effective in preventing us, even in areas where we were the numerical majority, from rising up en masse and fighting back, is if the violent behavior was unpredictable and arbitrary. This serves to keep us mentally off balance, wear us down physically, and to keep our focus on them, not ourselves. With this understanding in place, we should be able to see one thing very clearly. Even if we did nothing to antagonize, upset, hurt, or harm pale people, in order for them to maintain their oppression over us, every so often, randomly and arbitrarily, they must and will hurt us. Nothing we do short of ending their capability to hurt us will stop this. They don't require an excuse, and in point of fact, it's more effective for them maintaining their control over us when they don't provide any reason for harming us. To say that we should not practice counter-violence against them because of possible reprisals is only telling them one thing: that we remain afraid of them. There are other arguments in a similar vein, such as we don't have as many weapons as them, or they're the most violent people on the planet, but it boils down to the same thing. We're scared of fighting them because of the history of violence done to us. Another argument I hear constantly from those who say we shouldn't use violence against the pale people is that it makes us no better than them. That if we practice counter-violence, defense, and act with aggression toward them, that we become in some way like them. As tempted as I am to say, so what to this argument, I will not. I will simply illustrate the ridiculousness of this argument by telling you about the squirrel. Now, all of you know what a squirrel is. A tiny little mammal of the order Rodentia. A squirrel usually isn't a threat to much of anything unless you're a seed or a nut. However, squirrel mothers have been known to preemptively attack dogs, people, or anything else that threatens to harm their babies. Does this mean that squirrels are the same as dogs, wolves, or people? Of course not. She's a squirrel, fighting to ensure that her offspring survives to make more squirrels. Meanwhile, you actually have human beings that claim to fight in defense and protection of themselves makes them somehow immoral. But humans are on a higher level than a squirrel, Brother Black. Sometimes I wonder, but let's assume you're right. Can any of you clearly demonstrate what level we are on? I mean, can you point to nature and show that other than being big-brained, hairless apes, we differ from any other living thing? We are born. We need to eat, drink water, breathe, and sleep. We have to stay warm when it's cold and cool when it's hot. We age, mate, some of us bear children, and ultimately we die. Sure, sometimes we do cool stuff like write poetry or build a chair, but other than that, at what point in our natural development do we give up the capability or need for violence? Well, what about loving your enemies, Brother Black? Yes, love, the final refuge of the moral coward. Let's look at love, shall we? Many of us have pets, family, other animals who we treat as well as members of our own family. We feed them, pet them, love on them, care for them. We would do anything to protect them, would we not? Now, if our pet randomly starts attacking people, at first we would try and correct the behavior. We might use a muzzle, or if you're old school, a rolled up newspaper. However, if the behavior continued, we would ultimately look to euphemistically put them down, or not so euphemistically kill them. Why would we do this? We love them, right? Yes, we do. However, love doesn't mean that we allow someone or something to continue harming other people. Even if you love the pale people like brothers, if they are randomly, arbitrarily harming and killing pretty much everyone and everything, including themselves, how are you demonstrating your love by allowing them to continue to do so? Where's your rolled up newspaper for them? Where is the needle to put them down if they don't stop their violent behavior? Trust me, the pale people have no problem with putting us down when we commit any type of violent act, and they obviously don't love us. Your love should drive you to stop any act of violence committed not just against your loved ones, but from those you love as well, or it could be argued that you don't really love them at all. The final argument I'll address against violence is actually the worst one of all. This argument is so mindless and inane that I can barely keep my emotional cool enough to address it. I will try my best. This argument is that we don't need to practice violence against the pale people because, insert deity here, fights for us. He, she, it will destroy our enemies for us because of insert prophecy, prediction, revelation here. To keep my cool, I'll tell all of you a joke. There was a big rainstorm and the area where Paul lived began to flood. A man drove by and saw him sitting on his front porch and said, "Hey, Paul, flood's getting bad, bro. Hop in and we'll head up to some high ground." Paul said to the driver, "Nah, man, the Lord is looking out for me. Can't no waters destroy what he protects." Later on, the flood waters pour into Paul's house. A fireman on a boat passes by and sees Paul on the second floor of his house and shouts out to him, "Get in the boat, man. I'll take you to safety." Paul shouts back, "My God is a good God. He will make a way where there is no way." Finally, the flood waters forced Paul to the roof of his home. A helicopter flew over and lowered a basket down for Paul, telling him, "Get in, we'll fly you to a safe place." Paul waves the basket away and tells the pilot, "God is my refuge." Over the next few hours, Paul was swept away and drowned. He appears in the afterlife and is standing before God. Paul is kind of upset and asks God, "God, why didn't you save me?" God replies, "Nigga, I sent a car, a boat, and a damn helicopter for your black ass." Family, I believe in God, so I'm not going to take a dump on anyone's beliefs. However, if you are still stupid enough to believe that God is going to magically intervene on your behalf to save you, I want you to make sure to share that shit you're smoking with everyone and stop hogging it all to yourself. Puff, puff, pass. You're messing up the rotation. At the moment you were born with all of the capabilities needed to be free, happy, whole, and loved. Sure, you needed other human beings to develop those things within you, but you were given everything needed to reach out to other people too. Waiting on God to do something for you that you have the capability to do for yourself is the height of idiocy and is immoral in and of itself. You can quote me all of the scriptures, ayats, or whatever to support this foolishness, and it doesn't matter one bit. This is common sense. We don't need revelation to decide to act like any human would without ever having cracked open a Bible, Quran, or walked into a church, synagogue, masjid, or whatever. If your oppression is ever going to see an end, it will have to be you who brings it about, period. All of the magical thinking, third eyes, chakras, pineal glands, rosaries, tasbih, prayer, or faith in the world will not change what you will not get up and change. In conclusion, family, violence, aggression, and defense against the same is as natural, normal, and as righteous as anything else we humans can do. The pale people do not have a monopoly on violence unless we continue to allow them to have it. There is no war to wait for because we're already in it. To the extent that our black bodies do not fight theirs, we will continue to suffer under them. We can argue about tactics, timing, and so on. We should be discussing those things. However, at this point, anyone who is still arguing that we shouldn't be violent and aggressive against those who have shown us that they will be nothing but that, they are dead weight, and to save the rest of us, they need to be left right where they are to live or die on their own. If you have whooped the pants off of another black body but haven't lifted a finger to any pale person to cause them harm, you're foul. If your heart bleeds for any violence done by any of us to any of them, but you can always find a justification for them doing violence to us, you're a coward. If you claim that any bad behavior by any of us automatically justifies a collective reprisal against all of us, you're worse than a coward. If you can forgive and love those who hurt you and yours while refusing to stop them from doing harm in the first place, you are a filthy sinner and unrighteous to the core of your being. Now you all know where I stand. Tell me where you stand. It's your man Mark Black. Until next time, love, peace, prosperity, and power. Real power to my people.